to be sensible. The last thing we want to do now is to make knee-jerk reactions, change something without having properly considered and assessed all of the impacts, and as a result making things, well, a good outcome, we're not making it better. It's possible and could even make it worse. So those pilots seems very sensible. We also had a long meeting with Mike Richards. I think everybody knows the work that Mike is doing for us. Loosely labelled around looking at the single assessment framework, but he's looked a little bit more. And he has others working with him to make sure we have a good coverage across other sectors, in particular across adult social care. I mean, Mike is still, work is going. We don't have a report, but we just felt it important that we need to move quickly, and therefore we invited him along to talk to us this morning about his initial findings. I'm not going to go into any detail of that. In any event, he is still working on it, but I would summarise or categorise his thoughts as to some things that can probably be changed quickly, and he's going to recommend should be. And there seemed to be quite a close alignment between what he was coming up with there and what is in the approach that's been put forward to us by the executive team, which clearly was, to say the minimum, comforting. There are other things he may come up with that I think require a little bit more thought. That's not to say, I don't think we heard anything we fundamentally disagreed with or thought we disagree with, but some things do require a little bit more thought as to exactly how you might do something or the timescale. So in due course, when we've got Mike's full report, one of the challenges for the executive will be to go through in more detail and decide, make recommendations to the board as to how we should respond. So we gave really full support to the approach that the executive is seeking to adopt, which I think will be of interest to and comfort to all of our key stakeholders. We did pick up on a number of things that we want more attention to be given to. I'm not going to run through them all, but just to give a few examples. I mentioned there are pilots. We're very keen to better understand the governance around those pilots so that we are clear how we go, how we assess the performance, make as quick a decision as we can, and have properly thought through how we'd implement recommendations. So alongside that request for governance, and I think that's particularly true where there may be an overlap between pilots. You know, if you go through a pilot and something happens and you do something else and you look at the consequences, what was the driver? So a better governance, but also it's going to be enhanced or regular reporting to the board. Our next scheduled board meeting is 2 months' time, but we don't want to be waiting 2 months to look at this. So there'll be enhanced reporting to the wider board. There are some specifics around ratings and how they're described that we will be asking the Regulatory Governance Committee that Mark Chambers chairs to look at in more detail in a couple of weeks' time. There are one or two areas where we want to make sure that we're putting the right amount of effort into identifying and monitoring risks. I mean, by definition, if the situation in some cases is a little uncertain and we're having to make educated assessments on what approach to take, there is a possibility that will increase risk. So we need to better understand what those are. And then last, the point I've just touched on is looking at Mike Richards' findings when we have them to assess what the impact of that would be. So I think that's pretty much all I want to say about the discussion. There is one point I'd finalise on, though, which I'd make this comment particularly for the benefit of our staff. One common thread, I think, from a lot of our discussions is the recognising the impact on our people of the stresses over the last few months. But on the much more positive side, as colleagues who saw me speak at the operations conferences in the summer will know, I did make the comment that when you look at the negative feedback we got in the people surveys, whilst I wouldn't say it was good in the sense that I'd much rather have very positive feedback, the good thing was that the feedback was given in the way it was because people care. And that's an important foundation for all of this to be built on. And in that context, one of the points that Mike Richards left with us, well, maybe it was 2 points I say. One is everybody who spoke to wants a good CQC. Challenges for us to deliver it, but there is a strong demand for CQC to do well what it should do. And the second message he left us with was we have an awful lot of very committed staff, which I think we knew, but I did want to make that observation directly to any of our colleagues listening. I don't think this is the place to go through a great detail. There'll be communications later on what all of this means, but James, I don't know whether you want to add, and then I'll ask you to go straight into your report anyway.
Thank you. Thanks, Chairman. And so, as you've described, the really helpful discussion this morning, building on Kate Taroney's work and her priorities around giving our staff the tools, increasing our productivity and our effectiveness, and then restoring our reputation. So, as you're saying, we will communicate about the detail of this, but I think this morning's discussion gives us a really clear direction of travel for the organisation. We have put together a series of proposals. I do want to thank and acknowledge the work within CQC of many staff that have worked above and beyond to bring together a really detailed approach and to have done a really thorough analysis of the options for us. As you're describing it, it is rather an adaptive process where we will be implementing change and then adapting that as we go based on what we find, but in a programmed way, in a risk-managed way, and in a way that has a really effective accountability and reporting arrangement within CQC and to this board. Whilst I won't go through all of the detail now, I think it's helpful to signal to people that we do feel that we're going to need to change the way we're interacting with our new computer system, the regulatory platform, and take an approach which for assessments works away from that platform in a designed and safe way, and making sure that we manage and respect data properly, but would enable us to speed up and for our staff to be out there crossing the thresholds and working to increase the number of assessments that we undertake. We know as well that for our registration service, who have worked incredibly hard to get themselves into a better position, the regulatory platform is holding them up. And so we will be, again, writing to providers about a changed approach there, going back to our previous method of registration with people, but not losing anybody's work, and making sure that we communicate really effectively around how we'll do that. And then you mentioned Mike Richards' review of the SAF and the work that Professor Vic Rayner is undertaking as well for the social care sector. Notwithstanding we will receive that report and act on it, in the interim we know that from our analysis there are some changes that we need to make to the way that we're operating, not scoring at our evidence category level but scoring at our quality statement level, for example, and not taking into account legacy scores, for example, where we would seek to make quick changes to those but then amend our approach long term based on the evidence and the findings of Sir Mike Richards. With regard to our regulatory platform, we are still improving it, we are investing in it, we are not, as it were, making a final decision about it, but we do need to independently evaluate how that system performs and to give ourselves a long-term direction around that. And of course, we've begun the process of strengthening the numbers of staff in our operations service and accepting and working on the very important recommendations from the Penny Dash review about the role of the chief inspectors and making progress there. And finally, we have already begun the work of re-establishing relationship management with our external providers, both in pilot mode, putting it back for NHS trusts, and at the end of this month commencing work with social care providers to the same effect. It will take us time to make those changes, but it's a really important symbol that we must reconnect as a mechanism of giving good customer service, but also of managing risk for the organisation. So that detail will be published. We'll be writing out, giving a lot more detail about how that process will work. But I really wanted to send a signal to through our broadcast, as it were, that We've moved on from accepting accountability for the position that we are in, and we're now into implementing change and making that change sustainable. In terms of regulatory matters, Chairman, so I don't. I recognise the papers will have gone in rather late for this, so I acknowledge that people may not have questions yet on what is in there. But I just did want to highlight two matters. One is the publication of our maternity report, and I'll hand over to Chris Dziki for a comment on that. But it's a really important milestone for us as a commission to have that in the public domain and to demonstrate that our effectiveness can be really positive and really emphatic through work such as that. And then secondly, the work that we are doing with local authorities on local authority assessments, where again we've published more reports. We are into reflection mode on that work, wanting to acknowledge that during this baselining period we would like to work with both local authority colleagues and directors of adult social services to learn how our process can be strengthened through looking at our processes and looking at the impact of our individual judgments on councils and how we have an improvement agenda there. So I really want to thank local government and the ADAS, the Association of Directors, for their engagement with us on that question. Recognise that it's always easy to implement. It's always easy to sort of underestimate the amount of work you need to put into a new process like that. And during baselining, it's particularly important for us to learn about ourselves as we go along, as well as our regulation of local authorities. And I wanted, Chairman, then if I might invite Chris Dziki to make any regulatory insight comments he might want to make. Thank you.
Thank you, James. So a few updates from us around. First one, it's on independent care education treatment review. As most people know, earlier in the year, the government asked us to lead on ICT errors as part of supporting people with learning disability and autistic people who might find themselves in long-term segregation. So as part of that work, we met with the oversight panel earlier this month to talk about some of the terms of reference and what to expect from the 2-year program to influence market shaping, and also thinking about how we prevent or support people to prevent, and making sure that people have got right support at the right time and reduce the number of people who find themselves in long-term segregation going forward. The other area we've been focusing on is also around how we continue to build our credibility with external providers and organizations in response to the DASH review, like James was talking about. So we've got ongoing meetings with other stakeholders like NHSE, primary care, to think about what work we can do going forward, and also having one-to-one meetings that some of our directors are having with medical directors and directors of primary care to bring them on board and also to explain some of the work we're doing on the recovery plan. On the maternity and newborn safety investigation program, as of end of July, we completed a total of 3,737 investigation reports with 340 live investigations ongoing. The annual report for the maternity and newborn safety investigation for 23-24 is planned for publication later this year, and it will reflect on the performance across the whole year and the work undertaken following the move across to be hosted by CQC in October last year. And the final thing I'll mention is, like James said, we published our National Maternity Report, which was a hard read, and I would encourage others to spend time reading it. And it focused on some of the challenges that are facing maternity services, but around environment, around recruitment and retention of staff, inequalities and racism, communication with women and families. But what's really helpful is we also put in some recommendations and also improvement tools to help services to think about the areas they need to improve when they're thinking about maternity services. So we highlight the challenges, but we also help people to have solutions when they think about the improvement work they need to work. And we'll continue working with with colleagues in NHS England to think about the improvements that are required in maternity services. I'll leave it there if that's okay, Ian.
Okay, thanks, Chris. James, I'm also conscious that's regulatory. You did put something in packing in corporate performance. It may be that people haven't had around this table a chance to study it, although a lot of what is in there kind of underpinned, if you like, or was the driver of some of the discussions we had earlier. But perhaps I could just ask colleagues if they would like to have any questions for James or Chris, either on the regulatory stuff that specifically spoke to or in the reporting documents that are also in the pack. Charmian.
Thanks. I was just going to reflect on the fact that looking at the dashboard, it's good to see that we sort of covered most of the items there, James, that are in red in terms of the recovery plan and items that we picked up at RGC. I just wondered, we had a good discussion this morning on mandatory training and looking at how we're going to look at that over quarters and the kind of training that will be done. And I think it would be useful if we reflect that in here, because while it's red, there is some significant progress that's being made, and the way it is being managed may sort of change the dashboard. So it's just one that's worth reflecting on post the meeting.
Yes, thanks, Charmian. Yes, I mean, we clearly. Thank you, Chairman. Clearly, the change in the way that we approach spreading out that training throughout the year and creating a management culture where actually we don't think this is an addition to your work, this is the core of your work. And so I think the previous approach we've taken, where there's this kind of end of year or do it at Christmas time type of culture, we're trying to get away from that and treat it as a management issue. And then when people have or haven't done their training, it's the quality of that management conversation and understanding why that is or isn't happening that is really important in pushing that improvement in the right direction.
Thanks, James. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to James for all of the reporting. I mean, I do think we made some real progress this morning in getting to the point of being able to agree this is a valuable, important set of actions. Now let's kind of try to drive momentum in building the recovery plan, because I think that's what many of our colleagues are now looking for. There's a section in your report about communications and engagement. I don't know whether you could say a bit more about sort of how we now communicate through to our colleagues and to providers, that we're very clear about the actions we need to take to address the challenges that we face, and how that is going to be tracked over time. The other question I wanted to raise was something that isn't mentioned in this report, which is about the Lord Darcy report, and what do we think are the consequences for us. He made some comments about CQC, and sort of how can we best contribute as an organisation to the thinking that's clearly going on about the future plan for the health service in the light of Lord Darcy's report.
Thank you. So just on the general point about communications internally within CQC, we've been hosting all colleague calls. We've had at least a couple of thousand of colleagues on those calls in the last week or so, where we've both prepared the communications messages about the changes we want to make to the way that we're working, but also had a discussion around the Darcy report and indeed the Dr. Penny Dash report, so that our staff feel aware of those findings but also supported, and that where we have or where we intend to make a response, that we are underway with that. In terms of the communications out about our proposed changes, then I'll invite my colleague Chris Day to come in and just explain how we want to utilise existing arrangements. But we see this as probably the most important implementation issue for us. We need to get it technically right, but actually people understanding what we're doing is probably the most important aspect of this. So, Chris, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question, Stephen. One of the things that came across very clearly in the all-colleague calls that we've had, but also in the conversations we've had with providers and people who use services, is the need for clarity. So what was useful in this morning's conversation is we got to some good decisions in terms of a direction of travel. What we need to do is to take those and make sure that we can turn them into actionable plans. So following this meeting tomorrow, we've got some work just to make sure that we've used what we've heard from the board conversation to form those plans. We've then got 2 groups that are meeting to help us with the communications, and they'll meet regularly going forward. We've always had an internal reference group, and we've augmented it in recent times with particularly those frontline managers, deputy directors as they're called, who are often at the heart of the communications out to wider teams. So we're meeting with that group, not just to help share with them the conversation we've had at the board today, but also what that means in terms of each area, because not all areas of the business will need the same information, but we want to try and make sure that deputy directors are involved in the conversations around what we've talked about this morning means in practice. We want to have those conversations with deputy directors. Equally, we want to have conversations with providers and people who use services. I've been really fortunate this week. I've had a number of conversations with providers and provider group representatives, and I've got a further one tomorrow, where there's a real focus on trying to help us make sure we can communicate well to the provider sector and to people who use services. So we've got, again, alongside the deputy directors group and the wider internal communications group, we've got some trusted provider representative groups that we're going to have conversations with again on Friday to help land the messages externally. And then the plan will be from there to be able to communicate well internally to leaders and then to all colleagues, and externally to trade associations and all providers in the early part of next week. The key thing for me as well is not just that we do this once, but that we can regularly update with where progress is being made and make sure people feel involved in that conversation. One of the things that we touched on this morning was the development of assessment characteristics. Both colleagues and providers feel that is very, very important in order for us to be a successful regulator, and both are very keen to be part of that journey. We need to make sure that we can show progress in areas like that. And so we'll have both a conversation around tone and message, but also in terms of timescale, so we're clear to people what to expect. And we aim to put that together and revisit that probably weekly to fortnightly, depending on the progress that we need to make.
Thanks, Chris. And Mark.
Thank you. Just wanted to comment on a couple of things in the performance balance scorecard. You know, if I might, and to emphasise that at RGC we've been having discussions around call handling and response rates at the NCSC. Our colleagues there are doing a really amazing job under very difficult circumstances, delivering consistently to the service standards that have been set for them. But I think some of the month-by-month figures illustrate the challenges of prioritising higher risk calls. There are inbound calls that are more urgent and more indicative of risk than others, and we need to prioritise those. So, you know, we've been talking about that, but of course, you know, it's imperative that in trying to solve that conundrum, we're ensuring that our staff are properly supported and adequately resourced to deliver against the service standards we do set for them. But you know, that is on the radar screen for us at RGC, and we'll talk about it at our next meeting. But again, thank you to our frontline staff who are doing a great job there.
And thanks for reminding us, Mark, or making sure we do recognise the. We've already made general comment about the pressure people are under, but when people produce exceptional performance in those circumstances, we really should make sure it's recognised. James, is there anything you want to add? Or,
No.
any other questions for performance or regulation? Okay, well, look, if not, thank you very much indeed, James and others, both for your further summary of this morning and then for that report there. Let's move on to some of the other standing business then. So we've got an update on the culture changes, Shelley, outside. So the agenda says Darren Cutting. Darren is one of those that's been struck down with flu over the last 24 hours. So we should be joined by Shelley Hallam from the Academy, who I think everyone has met before. Are we absolutely sure she's out there? Oh. Can we just check? Oh, here we go.
Magic.
I've explained you a lot, Darren. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. So, important discussion. We were here before on a previous earlier iteration. I don't think there's any preamble I or anyone else needs to give, so if we just hand straight over to you to say where we are. I mean, you know the usual rules. We take the papers as read, people have read them, but even so, probably helpful if you introduce them.
So this is an update on the values behaviours in line with our cultural work. So we've kept an integral and consistent process to date, and we're very proud of that. We're delighted by the input we've had from colleagues, networks, TUs, ET and board to date. It has improved this work. We're now at a crucial, I would say critical stage for moving this work forwards to get to a conclusion. So since the last board meeting, we've taken on what was said and merged inclusion and respect, and we worked with our data and insight colleagues to do that. So that was validated from the data, and inclusion clearly came out as the fourth value. So we've continued to consider curiosity, which was the outcome of the input from the last board meeting, and with that input alongside material around the learning, innovation and improvement from the workshops, we have presented curiosity as a value to our focus groups. We've run 5 focus groups to date and covered inclusion and curiosity in those focus groups as they were the later addition as the values. Our colleagues have expressed the most variation in their views on curiosity, so I think it's safe to say they were curious about curiosity, and it's led to some interesting conversations in itself. Many of them viewing curiosity as a behaviour rather than a value in itself, and lots of differentiation on how we were viewing the word curiosity and how we understood the word curiosity, but also understanding the behaviours around it. So there's some more work to do around getting the behaviours that sit underneath if we're going to go forward with curiosity as a value, to allow our colleagues to fully understand what enacting that value would mean. There's a welcoming of inclusion and the focus groups. We paused those focus groups, and what I would also like to note is that we then we went to ET, presented, and communication in ET was that there was a risk around dropping excellence as a value at this time. And from an external perspective, what would that be viewed like? What would that look like? Now, in our original data set, we had our first 3 values that came out clearly, and in that original data set of the next 4 values, excellence came out as number 4. So ET wanted us to consider using that as a 6th value. Now, at the beginning, we've always said that we would use 3 to 5 values, with the rationale being the fewer values we have, it allows us to hold those values in mind, clearly communicate our identity, priorities and guiding principles both internally and externally more easily. So there is some work to do on understanding whether there is an opportunity to do further work through exploring one-to-one conversations, which we're on with now, around do curiosity and excellence sit together, or are we looking at them being 2 separate values? Once we've gained some more information and clarity, then we'll resume with the focus groups and continue to shape the behaviours that sit under those values, because we've got a good set of behaviours sitting under there now. So I think that's the update. We will then continue with the work and come back to you with a recommended set of values, hopefully in November. So, any questions?
Thanks, Shelley. I've let others go first. Christine.
Thank you. I think I'm just going to add to your mixed bag of views on curiosity, but I was a bit disappointed. I'm pleased, really pleased that curiosity is there. To me, that feels a really important value. And I sort of think it embraces excellence and inclusion and a lot of other things too. But I think at the moment the wording is just a bit disappointing. It's a bit weak, and I think it could be a lot stronger. I think to me, curiosity is not about listening. I don't think the word excel should be in there because I think it makes assumptions that we can't necessarily deliver on. But it should be about asking questions and seeking out creativity and innovation. So I'd like to see it being more proactive and less responsive, which is how it read to me at the moment.
James, you want to speak?
Well, I want. Thank you. Should be the other way around, that prompting, Chairman. So I wanted to just speak on behalf of ET or prompt the ET voice about our feelings around excellence. So this is a mixture of really creating expectations in the organisation for improvement and particularly for performance issues, and that there is sometimes a danger that the values can be seen as a kind of soft side of valuing people and for what they do, but not necessarily on behalf of the people that we serve, setting a value that is about delivery for them. And that's where the excellence sentiment comes from, and that was the main discussion within the ET. We felt, I think, that 6 was okay in terms of, the kind of scope of what people can remember and utilise. So we didn't have a problem. We weren't, as it were, trying to knock something out necessarily, but simply add excellence and the kind of quality of the work that we do and the way in which we do it and the level to which we do it as being part of our values.
Okay. Got lots of hands going up. Claire, I'll come to you first, and then another member of the exec, and then Charlie and Mark.
Thank you. First of all, I'm delighted to see inclusion there on behalf of the Equality Networks. I think really my reflection on this is they're really ambitious values, and I really like them, but I think we've got a real challenge for how we sort of really live and embed those. And I presented a story this morning, my own carer story, to the board, and it's sort of the importance of having a supportive and inclusive line manager and having those discussions. So I think for me and on behalf of the Equality Networks and the employee voice, I think it's really about how we sort of take those values off the page and embed them in our culture.
I just want to come back on that, Claire. Absolutely, this is the first phase of our cultural work, and to get the right values to then thread through everything else is so essential. So yeah, it is ambitious, but it is going to be our North Star to go back to, so thank you.
Joyce, I'll come to you first, and then ladies.
Yeah, I also wanted to thank you and everyone else involved in developing the values that we have on the page, and it has gone across the organisation and lots of people have been involved. I do value that inclusion's included. I'm in agreement with James and the rest of the exec team that this is probably not a good time to lose excellence when we need to think about what we have to deliver and why it's so important to health and social care. I am concerned, though, that the plan is to come back in another couple of months after we've helped to describe these further, when my key issue is not the words on the page, is the fact that we have to live these values culturally within the organisation. I really would like to start now. We've just talked about recovery this morning. Our recovery plan will work if we've got the right culture and values and behaviours. I think many of people in the organisation will recognise these values and want to live these values, and I'd rather help make this a vehicle to support the change that we need to do, and I'd rather start now. I think we can iterate and wordsmith and actually develop them as we go along. If we, what does it look like? What's the standards we expect to live by and deliver, and the standards we won't walk past if we see that people aren't living these values. So I'd rather not have the timetable of 2 months to come back to board, but have let's start living these values. Let's come back to board with an update. as to, what are we finding, what's the evidence behind it.
Maybe others we should comment on that in a moment, but Charmian and Mark.
Thanks. I was really going to come in, I guess, on Joyce's point, and I support Joyce totally. I think it's wonderful that such a lot of time has gone into to working with colleagues to come up with the values. I think we do now need to really start living those and looking at how we practically can make them come to life. So support what you say, Joyce, and I think perhaps in November it would be useful to see. I think some of these things can be done in parallel. We can be looking at how they can be embedded into appraisal processes, recruitment processes, leadership training. So I think it would be good to see the combination in November and to see how some of that process has started, rather than getting to November and having the words without the progress.
Mark.
Thank you. There's been a huge amount to commend about this process. There's been the opportunity to engage just about everyone in the organisation, which is absolutely key. And what is emerging is something where one would hope that everyone can recognise their contribution and their participation in it. Having said that, of course, the end result is never exactly what each of us would want. I think the origins of curiosity, I think, go to, and it's something that we've talked about a lot around this table, and that exact word has been, we've heard from senior stakeholders as well, unprompted, in relation to this. This organisation needs to be more curious, and I think it reflects the fact that your values should be ideally a mix of the things that are a reaffirmation of what's great about the organisation, but also some things that are a little bit aspirational. And I think curiosity is aspirational for us. I don't think we are inherently curious enough as an organisation. We think we look internally a lot. We don't seek enough external best practice enough, and all the evidence is that we're not great listeners internally or externally. Otherwise, that was a big theme of has been a big theme of the last 2 years. So I would personally have, this is exactly where I would have expected to land, a mixture of some things that are reflective of things that have been strengths and some things that are new and require unpacking before we really understand them. As in truth would excellence. Excellence is not somebody that is not a behaviour or not something you can measure somebody on. It's an output. So I think however we do this, whatever we land on, we're definitely going to have to unpack it so that the behaviours required to underpin it are clear. I think we also need to do that in. To really bring these to life, we need to do it in 2 dimensions as well. We need to be clear on the standards and behaviours that would be expected of everyone in the organisation, but we also need to unpick the leadership dimension quite significantly as well. That was our second weakest employee survey score was leadership leading the values, so living the values. So that's got to be unpicked so people can be clear on what we can expect from everyone and our colleagues, but specifically what we can expect from our managers. I think the other dimension is that we've got to bring this to life for not just what it feels like to be here, to work here as an organisation, but also what it feels, what it feels like for us as a regulator, to make sure that there is an external dimension to that. The words that are here around inclusion, for example, are quite inwardly focused at the moment, and I think, what does that really mean? What does that mean in terms of what it would feel like to be regulated by us? So I strongly agree that it would be very good for us to land the words very soon, because the really difficult bit is how you unpack this into the underpinning behaviours that we can really hold people accountable for displaying.
Can I just add? I mean, I couple of comments, probably quite similar to Mark, but just looking at it in a different way. Although, let me start by saying I agree with Sharp, and I can't see why we can't run stuff in parallel. Nobody's saying, we're not going to do anything until November. I mean, 3 of the values here are pretty much exactly as they were before, and it should be the way we're doing things. We're reaffirming them. This is nothing new, so we don't have to wait for approval to implement. We're just saying we're reaffirming the ways that we want to work, so it can be baked in. But on the other stuff, I'm just reflecting on what I hear when I'm out talking to people, whether those be users of system or providers. And I do hear people say, we must act with integrity. I do hear people talk about the need to be more collaborative. And I do hear absolutely people think we need a caring motivation. I've never had anybody say to me, you need to be excellent. It's just not the way the outside world looks at us. So, and I don't know how we'd measure it. So I'm not saying no, others have to think about it. But I just throw about the comment that I think the outside world expects us to have values of integrity, collaboration and caring, or something very similar. I'm not sure the outside world expects us to be excellent. They'd like us to be very good or good. And we spent 3 hours this morning debating how we might move from where we are to get there. But excellence is I think, a slightly curious value, and I'd wonder how we'd measure it. I could have a debate about how we'd measure the other 3. I'm not sure how we would measure excellent. It's incredibly intangible. So that's one thought. On the curiosity, whether curiosity is the right word or not, one can debate. I mean, we're trying to find a one word to look at a concept here. But we said before, I think it was a comment I made in the last board meeting, that the world out there expects us to play a role in improvement. It was in our strategy a few years ago. I think West Streeting has been out there commenting about we have an important role to play. I said earlier that we spent an hour with Mike Richards this morning. Obviously you weren't there, Shelley, but he talks about the critical role that we have to play in identifying good practice and sharing that and helping people improve. So everybody is telling us this is fundamental to the future of CQC. So I really do struggle if we end up with a set of values, I'm putting this quite strongly, but if we end up with a set of values that don't recognise something that the Secretary of State and the person, our own advisor, and everyone else say is so important to our future, I think we're going to be dead in the water. It just doesn't ring right. So whether curiosity is the right word, I don't know. Now, if what we're hearing is the culture is not to do that, then we need to think about how we get it there. But I would posit that in the next year or so, whatever the starting point, we simply have to have as a fundamental value playing a role in the system improving. And that has to be a value of the organisation.
Thank you. I just want to reflect back in the focus groups. There wasn't a pushback on the idea that we would behave in a curious manner. It was more about whether it was a value or it was the behaviours that sat underneath. It was definitely a good discussion that was had around it. So thank you.
We've probably spent too much time already, but I know there's other hands going up. Chris, I think you were first, and I'll come down here.
Yeah. What I was going to say is that, so I was here, I've been here long enough to remember the last time we set our values. I didn't have grey hair then. And it was a really uplifting process in the organisation. So everyone fed in, and there was loads of series of workshops and things. And it culminated in the executive team announcing one by one the values. And there was a genuine big celebration. Everyone got behind them. And I think when I attended a workshop, and I fed in the things I thought, it wasn't this list. And there's things in here that I wouldn't have had, and I had different things, and I'll not share them. But I think there is something about accepting this is a group exercise, and this is a series of workshops and focus groups that we've run. And to Mark's point before, not everyone will end up with what they wanted in that. But there's something for me that's really important about if we've gone through that process and people have fed in, then we need to ensure that we keep pure to that. And if you look at the values the top 5 values that came back, I think, were integrity, collaboration, caring, inclusion, and excellence. So I think we just need to be careful that we don't change and amend too much the values that everyone has said. Otherwise, the danger is those values will switch people off and people won't be able to live to those values. So I think that's the only thing I would be cautious of.
I hear what you say. I'm just pointing out, I feel quite strongly, if we don't see our role and have as a value wanting to help the system improve, I think we have a strategic problem. So either I'm not sure whether I'm emphasising but using different words, something people think about, or whether I'm making a point that people don't think that way. But quite generally, I struggle, given my role, if I have to appear before a Secretary of State or a Health Committee or whatever, if we end up with a set of values that don't incorporate something that everyone else says is the most important thing we should be doing. So, you know, the evidence will show, and it's not up for me to say what the values are. They've got to be lived values everyone accepts. But I just flagged that if we don't have something like this, I think we have to have a separate debate because we've got a problem as an organisation. Stephen, Mark and Chris, and probably make those the last questions.
On the excellence debate, I was going to agree with James that excellence should be in there until you made your comments, Ian, suggesting that it shouldn't. The way I come at this is that kind of we all know, and we've known for some time, and Penny Dash has confirmed it, we are not currently a high-performing organisation, not by a long way. So whatever particular word we choose, we've absolutely got to have a value about becoming a high-performing organisation, where that would include high-performing at helping the system improve. Excellence may or may not be the right word, but there is something about a value of being committed, driven, energetic in driving organisational performance so that we once again become a high-performing organisation. And I really feel that should be in there. Second part, I would agree with Joyce very much that kind of three of these values are ones that, it's on my lanyard, they've been our values for a long time. And actually, colleagues told us in the staff survey and LLRC, the problem is not those words, it's that you're not living them. And we've really got to move rapidly now to work out, so what will it mean to live them? So personally, I'd be kind of encouraging the executive supported by HR to sort of finalise quite rapidly the chosen words and move quickly into what culture do we need to have that gets everybody behaving in a way that is consistent with this, because that's been the gap. It's not the words, it's the absence of alignment in the way we behave in becoming once again a high-performing organisation.
Let's take the comments and then ask Shelley to come back. If we keep moving quickly. Mark, I think you were next.
So again, wonderful exercise. I take Chris's point, which is the whole point of bringing in an inclusive view of an organisation is to get that inclusive view. We're never going to wordsmith this correctly for any one individual, so I think we have to be cautious about that. I'd also double underline the statement about moving as fast as we can towards behaviours that we want to see expressed, but also behaviours that we won't tolerate anymore. And it is the two sides of that I think are important to sort of drive behavioural change inside of organisations. One piece to advocate what I see inside the concept of curiosity here is also the forward-looking natures of values. They are meant to make us fit for the future, not just for now. And one of the things that I think we can all agree with is that the pace of change in the outside environment, both for ourselves as well as for service users and the people that we regulate, has never been faster. So that pace of change requires us also to continue to adapt, evolve, innovate for the sake of improvement, self-improvement, as well as improvement in health and social care. And I think regardless of what word heads this, that last column speaks to that forward-looking requirement to make sure that we keep up our pace of evolution in lockstep with the pace of evolution outside. Otherwise, again, 5 years down the line, we'll find ourselves in a place where we are no longer relevant to the conversation.
I think well put, Mark. Chris and Belinda, and then put those on the table, ask Shelley to respond, then we'll close it. Chris.
Two points. One built on something Mark just said. Just to give my perception on where providers are, I think they do expect excellence. They don't describe it as excellence, but what they describe it as is, as you said, high standards all the time, where the performance is good. They may not use that word, but that's what they expect, and that's what they've not had, and that's what I think is important that we deliver for them. So I think there is something very important, intrinsically important about the word excellence, or a word that denotes the same thing. On the second point, the point that Mark's just made, when these were developed, and I was with Chris, we both got greyer hair than we had when we started this process. There was an energy to it. There was also there was a lot of work that we did externally and internally to help coalesce around those values. We did. It links very much to our work on purpose. I often describe purpose as 26 words that took 6 months to write, because there was a lot of engagement to make sure that everyone understood it importantly. I think where we've moved in 10 years, I think 10 years ago people wanted us to make sure we had a robust process to inspect organisations. To look at the end of our purpose, it says we encourage organisations to improve. People want to know why things aren't changing, what would make them different. I think this is your point as well. So I do think there is, whether it's the word curious or whether it's a different word, we are being asked to do more than just inspect and rate. We're being asked to say why. And part of why is curious or another word. But it has to be intrinsic to our role that we don't just rate a service. We're not just not the traffic wardens of health and care putting tickets on things, walking away and saying you need to sort that out. It is our job to understand why things don't work and to help providers, ICSs, local authorities understand what they need to do differently. So I'm whatever the word is, if it's not curious, it can be a different word, but there has to be something which talks to that, and there has to be something that talks to our performance.
Thanks. Belinda.
Just another vote for excellence, really. I think if it came in so high in the wider discussions, that I think we really should have it up there. And a lot of that for me is about the definition of excellence. So for me, the definition of excellence is about continuous improvement and working to high standards, working to the best of your ability. So, I think it really just needs to be in there, and was, in the consultation came out very highly above curiosity.
Well,
and we can be very specific in our detail about how we want to define what excellence is.
Yeah, don't go wrong. I'm not saying it shouldn't be in there. I'm just saying, as an observation, it's not a phrase I've ever heard used outside looking in. And I also question how we measure it. But if people feel strongly it's there, and they can live it, and it can be measured, then absolutely fine, if that's what people think. And as you said, this is the whole point of this. The way we did this exercise was it's built from the bottom up. We don't want to make the mistake that you said apparently we did last time of wheeling them out one by one from the UT. Shelley, what sense would you make of those comments, and where do we go from here?
So where I think we go from here, it's been really positive, and thank you for the way that you've delivered that feedback today, because it's really felt very positive for me sitting here. Is that we've got an opportunity from your comments last time about looking at overlap, that the 7 values that came out top included excellence and innovation, and just the same as respect and inclusion, they overlap. I've already spoken to my data and insight colleagues before coming today who confirmed that. So we can look at, what does excellence mean if we look at both of those things, potentially look to that. In terms of curiosity, I'm hearing that we've got a duty to set a tone for the future, and I think that's so important in our culture that we go back to holding on to that, and against what I came in with in terms of that I was holding tight to 5 values. I think there's an opportunity to extend it. So I think we've got something firm to go away with if that's agreement from you. From these discussions today, we look at excellence and innovation because our colleagues have really brought those to the surface in that whole process. We look at where the overlap is in line with our data and insight colleagues and come out with a value around that. And we look at curiosity and making sense of it in a better way than we have done so far. In terms of the now, acting now, to your point about the 3 values, we're going to start the focus groups again, really start to move that work forward with the ones that we know that we've got over the line already.
I think that's fine. If I could just, I'd emphasise firstly Stephen's point. I mean, it is about living them, not doing them. And it seems to be the benefit of this exercise was not to change anything, but to re-examine and, as part of that, refresh the whole thing. So hopefully the process of saying what should they be focuses minds on and actually how do you go about living them. And that, to me, is the real power or benefit of it. Leave you to move as quickly as you can with the other things. I suppose I'll just leave you with a cross-check, that do a sense check of how what we think they should be compares to what they market expectation is. And if there's a gap, we need to think about it. And that may be a different discussion. Maybe that's a future strategic positioning if we need to shift. But I think Mark put it very well, that a value should also be about looking to what we want to be as opposed to how we see ourselves today. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate you coming in. Joyce, an anti-racist approach in CQC. So it's Clara coming to join us, is it?
Yeah, unfortunately, Lucy Wilkinson is also ill with the flu bug every single person has. So Cara Haynes has come to join us. You want me to start?
Seems to take people longer to find the doors here than in the other room. Well, that's the problem when you're going out. Hi, welcome.
So I'll briefly introduce, and then I'll hand over to Cara to do the highlights of the report. So the board, we had a training session on race and racism, I think a couple of months ago, maybe slightly longer, but this came out of our listening and learning in response to concerns review. And the session was also attended by the Race Health Observatory as well. From that session, we've developed this policy on being an anti-racist organisation, and we've developed it with the board discussion, but also through engagement with key stakeholders and across the organisation. We do see this as a really important time to start this policy and to have this policy for the organisation. Racism and the impact of racism we can see in society. You just have to look over the last summer that we've had in this country, the impact it can have, devastating impact that it can have. It's also impactful within our own organisation and how colleagues want to be treated, want to be included and want to belong to the organisation and have that psychological safety. And we can also see the impact of racism on health inequalities, and people do not get the same outcomes because of structural, systemic and sometimes institutional racism within organisations. So we also recognise, as talked earlier, we are in recovery and we've got a recovery plan. This is not an adage, this is essential to our recovery plan in having the right cultures and the right inclusion. So it's an important time to start. So I'll hand over to Kira. Lucy, as I explained, is not here, and Kira will go through some of the highlights of the paper.
So assume we've read the paper. So you don't need to go through the detail, but if there's any points you want to highlight, we'll go straight to questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joyce. And good afternoon.
You need to put your microphone on.
Is that better? Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, all. So what is the strategic and policy approach to anti-racism all about? Fundamentally, it's a way of thinking and acting that commits to using all of our levers to address the historical and contemporary impacts of racism across all of our functions, internally and externally. It's underpinned by the principles developed by the Race and Health Observatory and takes an intersectional lens which values the diverse ways that people experience racism. The strategies developed will be able to be learnt from and applied to other forms of discrimination to ensure better outcomes for all. Why do we need this approach? We know that racism permeates at every level of society, individually, institutionally, and structurally. Racism is a key determinant of health, and it stops us in meeting and fulfilling our core purpose as a regulator of high quality and safe care. The disproportionate detainment of black men under the Mental Health Act, the disparities in experiences and mortality faced by Black and Asian women, and the bullying and harassment faced by people such as Michelle Cox and our own colleagues is a glaring reminder of the need to act now and align our internal developments, whether that's across the learning and listening to responding to concerns review, our inclusive mentoring, our response to the race riots, within this coordinated approach. So what's your role within this? Within the board sessions, we developed what your roles are in relation to strategy, accountability, performance and culture. We ask you to commit to these roles, to live the principles and to see this as vital work so it is progressed with the pace that it needs. The outcomes that we expect from this is equitable care for people who use health and care services, for a better culture and psychologically safe experiences for our own colleagues, and a fairer way of regulating for high quality and safe care. Thank you.
Sorry, thanks very much. Questions or comments? Ali, first.
Thank you for the update in the paper. I think this is a positive and important step we're taking in terms of proudly being an anti-racist organisation and thinking about how we can ensure that is embedded as a core part how we address inequalities. What I'd like to understand a bit more is where the early thinking is with relation to the performance role specifically. I agree entirely with the sentiment that how we operate as an anti-racist organisation requires us to embed anti-racist behaviour so that if we come across things that are racist or challenging or that drive inequalities, we address them too. I think what would be really helpful would be to understand, in the same way this talks about specific quantifiable anti-racist performance measures, how we would apply that same performance lens to understanding what a successful execution of the strategy might look like 2 or 3 years from now.
Sorry, I completely agree with the need to have performance measures so we can see how this, the impact this has over a long sustained period of time. I think something to raise that is a risk that we are looking to mitigate is the fact that we currently don't have a quality monitoring across many of our functions, which does hinder us in being able to meaningfully assess the outcomes. So again, I urge you, as decisions and work comes across your table, to be thinking about these things to ensure that we can successfully measure outcomes. And following this, post-approval, we would like to develop more measures so that we can come back to you and say how this is progressing.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I think what would also be helpful as this continues is, in addition to thinking about how it's embedded, if there are 2 or 3 of the most critical or most impactful measures that we can look at, either through specific actions or embedding how we operate slightly differently, that would be helpful to understand as we develop. Again, as mentioned earlier, we are in a very busy phase as an organisation, so to give us the best chance of being successful in this endeavour, I think focus would be really helpful.
I think that's right. I think we already actually have measures internally as an organisation in our staff survey where we dissect what different groups have said in terms of how they feel included, how they may be bullied or harassed, or what opportunities they have. So we already have those performance measures. I think Kira has also given you examples where we want to influence women's maternity care, mental health for black men, and we will choose other examples to say, if we do this work, are we having the impact on inequalities that we see?
Charmin.
Thanks for a great overview. I just had a few reflections, if I can, in terms of your phases and a few things we might be able to add. So in terms of your under phase 1, the freedom to speak up piece, we have listened, and so as I chair the ARIC, and one of the things that we are introducing is the freedom to speak up reporting, and we were really pleased that this time around it came summarised by protected characteristic. So while it's anonymous, we are looking at that to understand the key themes and ensure it is being escalated through the right levels of governance. Under that phase 1, I also think a point that's slightly different to sort of measuring outcomes is being able to use the rich set of data we have to really triangulate what's happening. So we have the freedom to speak up data, we have the colleague survey data, which we look at in the next section, but we also have exit interviews, we have sickness reports, we have turnover, and I think it's the richness of that data when we get the people reports to the board on a periodic basis that we should be looking at to say what does the combination of that tell us. and what can we learn from triangulating that data, and be really open to sort of really delving into that. Phase 2 in terms of auditing, again, because I chair the ARIC, it's important probably to note that we are this year getting an audit of LLRC and the outcomes of that, to ensure that we're not only looking at progress, but have the things that have been implemented had the desired outcomes. So that audit is being scoped at the moment, and we shouldn't be far away from getting outcomes, and that's a third-party audit. So that's done by GIA, the Government Internal Audit Agency. So again, we'll be holding ourselves to account. And I think going forward with future years' audit plans, I think looking at some of these things from an independent lens is really important. So it'd be great to work with you as we come into that audit planning approach 2 or 3 years out, to look at how we can put some of this into that, to get a really clear independent view. Are we delivering on what we think we are?
Would you like to?
James, sorry.
Thank you, yeah, and thanks, Kira. I really want to express sort of executive support for this. This does go back to, it's an outcome of LLRC, actually, a recommendation that we do this. So it's really good to see the culmination of that arrive here at the board. And not only is it the right values for us, it's a much more active approach for us. So I think it moves us on, and that's why I'm really pleased to be supporting it. And it does then lead us to work in other areas, in the regulatory work that we do, in our work as an employer, and in our campaigning work and our voice work. And the race riots were a really good example of when that occurred. Because we had done the groundwork for this policy, we were much speedier about responding to that, almost to the day, because we had this thinking and this approach embedded. So I think it leads to sort of further positive work. It is not, however, as easy as saying it, and I recognise in the organisation there are examples where we are not living up to the values where we should do in this area. So we need, as it were, both to adopt it, but also to have an internal look all of the time about where we're not doing so well and learning from that. Thank you.
Christine, I think you were next, and then Chris.
Thank you. I mean, it sort of builds actually on the last two speakers. Again, I very much welcome this policy, and it's really about what we as a board can be doing on a personal level. So it sort of links to the last discussion we had about values. We're not here just to pass policy. What are we doing as individuals and as a collectively as a board to change our behaviours and to make sure that we are inclusive and that we are responding? And I had a very interesting conversation with my inclusive mentor about how am I going to take back the learning and the wisdom from those conversations to my role on the board and to share with the board, which led to a question about, well, how many of the non-exec board members actually are doing the inclusive programme. So I had a look, and half of us are and half of us aren't. And I appreciate that we are busy people and there's a lot else going on, but it's sort of actually how much are we going to commit individually to making this anti-racist policy live, and then how are we, and I don't have the answers, but how are we as a board going to ensure that we understand both internally and externally people's experience, and that we take that on board when we're making decisions?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Chris, and then last comment.
I really, the paper's great, it's a great paper. One of the things for me as we're moving to phase 2 is I think there's some things that we are weak on that we need to resolve. And I think you can audit something you know is not going to work, and then say, oh yeah, that hasn't worked, and do something about it, or we can do something about it. And I'm thinking particularly of give feedback on care. It is a primary way in which we understand how people use service. I know you know this, but I'm not talking to you as if it's like it, but it's a primary way in which people who use services tell us about their experience. And I do think we're weak by not being able to understand the characteristics of people, not to be fair, not just race, but other characteristics as well. So I think as we think about the second phase of our work, I think where we know we're weak, we should really try and fix that before we audit it, because in a sense, auditing something you know isn't going to work is not as useful as fixing it and then seeing if it has worked. And I know you know that, so I'm saying that to colleagues as much as I am to back to you. But it's a great piece of work, so well done.
Thanks. Okay, Mark, your last question.
Just very quickly on triangulation, which I strongly agree with. You know, these individual measures are not particularly informative until you bring them together. That's when the insights come. You can definitely help us with the number of triangulation points that we have, which is limited. We're trying to grow them, but if there are other areas where where data is available, you know, we have anecdote, but where we actually have data, that would be really, really helpful. And then secondly, I think we, in terms of our governance framework, need to think about, well, where does this come together? Because the danger sometimes with triangulation is it's all, you know, it's all there, but it's being discussed in different fora and different committees. And, you know, maybe it's something that we need to try and assemble actually in this forum, because this is the only place that it really could come together. But I think we need to reflect on that. How could we bring that together? But thank you.
I mean, thanks, Mark. I agree. Probably better summary than I was going to give of a particular point. I mean, this is, you mentioned there's no asks, this is discussion. So you put it down a number of things you want from us, or we should consider. I mean, I think you can hopefully take from this strong to violence support. It's essential. It's not a nice to have. What I think would be useful, if I'm not quite sure who should take it away, but I'll look to Joyce and you in the first instance, just to say, well, you've got a number of things that the board should be doing. Let's see if we can take that to the next stage. And to pick up on Mark's point, you know, one could have a lot of diffusion of something like this, but it probably ought to come together at the board level, I would have thought. So could I ask you for a future discussion, so far we agree with all of this, so exactly what do we need to be doing? And maybe another way of looking at that is doing differently from what we're doing at the present time. The only other thought I just would have from past experience is that if you're trying to bring about change, it can be very helpful to circulate heroes, or maybe villains as well, but heroes are easier to, you know, so if there are good examples of calling out racism, that would be useful to know. I think it's both a good example, but it also incentivizes, you know, if he or she can do it, then so could I. The poor behaviour is rather more difficult to use, but I wouldn't call it out either. You know, if we believe this is important, then we should be prepared to back that up with a sanction if we think there's particularly bad behaviour. So I think that needs to be baked into the system.
Thank you.
Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah, thank you. I think the paper does highlight the roles the board can play to support this within the organisation, and we'll do work to demonstrate how this policy is being lived and what difference we're making because of this policy as well. Thank you, Kira.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your time, and I hope the rest of your day goes well.
Okay. Hi Nadia, good to see you again. So we've got two things here for approval. We take them as read. They're pretty clear reports, I think. So I'm not sure we need to debate the content, but I'm sure there'll be comments to raise. Take the papers as read, so you don't need to talk us through them. It'd be helpful if you could just clarify, or to avoidance of any doubt, what the approval requirement is and what happens to these things afterwards. I have a concern there's some numbers in here that may be wrong, just from looking at it. I meant to send you a note. My apologies, I didn't. So when we get to approval, it'll be approval subject to me telling you what I think is wrong and you double checking it. But apart from that, we'll ask for approval. But over to you.
Thank you, everyone. I'll be providing a progress update aligned to our equity, diversity and inclusion strategy priorities. So in terms of inclusion, we have made significant progress since the summer when we launched our workplace adjustments policy and library. There has been over 200 people completing our workplace passport. So we've started to deliver some real impact in terms of supporting our colleagues to perform at their best, so we can really live our good days at work priority and our value of caring and creating an inclusive environment in the workplace. We will continue to build on this momentum. We are delivering over the course of this month and next manager briefings, so we can equip our leaders with the tools so they can support their teams at scale. This will include how they facilitate those conversations so they can build that trust and safe space with colleagues and demonstrate that we are a valuing organisation that really cares about our staff. In the long term, we will be looking at iterating our workplace passport using a technology solution. We'll be using an accelerator event to do this. So in the long term, we can use more real-time data to inform the way that we work, to embed a social model of disability in our ways of working. These interventions will be really important for the future so we can achieve our disability confident accreditation as planned in the EDI strategy action plan by next year. In addition to this activity specifically on disability, we are working very closely with our Carers Equality Network to improve adjustments more widely, because the workplace passport is directed to be supportive for all colleagues further to disability. In terms of our activity on race, we've started with a leadership approach and we've laid the foundational work with the board race training that you were part of earlier this year. We have now advanced to the learning needs analysis phase, so we can develop a comprehensive anti-racist learning offer for our colleagues more widely. This will be aligned to our organisational anti-racist strategic approach that we are working closely with our colleagues in policy and strategy. When the race riots erupted, we took decisive action. We directly, internally and externally called out racism. We also worked in partnership with our Race Equality Network to provide tailored wellbeing and safety support. So this set a precedent for us in terms of our anti-racist ways of working that we hope to embed as part of our recovery efforts. Further to this, in terms of eliminating our negative scores with regard to bullying, harassment and discrimination. In the new year, we'll be taking a QI-led approach to evaluate the process so we can build confidence in the system and proactively address bullying, harassment and discrimination. This is part of a three-pronged approach alongside our values and behaviours refresh and our freedom to speak up policy work, so colleagues feel more confident in the system and we can restore accountability and a zero tolerance approach to bullying, harassment and discrimination. In terms of recruit talented colleagues, which is our second priority within the strategy, we do expect by the end of the year to have a proposal in terms of refreshing our recruitment, because we've had an external consultant come and review the end-to-end process. Before that, it is really important that we use the increased operational recruitment as an opportunity to improve the diversity in who we are attracting and appointing, so we can hope to achieve what we've set out in the EDI strategy in terms of our representation targets. It's really important that we do this so we can improve our decision making and also ensure that we better represent the communities that we serve. Finally, our last priority on investing in our colleagues, this should be closely aligned with our work on recruitment, and we've started to do this by promoting our career conversations for grades below executives this month until November, so we can align our internal succession planning alongside recruitment outcomes, so we can attract lots of new talent but also invest within our own talent, so we build our own leaders, and this fosters better engagement, well-being and retention overall for the organisation. Within the career conversations that we are doing, we are hoping to identify colleagues as part of the new cohort for our Inclusive Leadership Pathway programme. This year, we were nominated by the Institute for Chartered Personnel and Development for an award for this programme as the best diversity and inclusion initiative, so we hope to build on that. Further to that, in terms of our execs who are from a minority background and have already had those career conversations, we are hoping to give them more targeted support so they can be part of business critical roles as and when they arise. Again, this connects to better decision making at those levels, and we hope to embed them as part of EDI objectives for our leaderships within our leadership strategy. So today we're really looking for your endorsement because this work is really critical for us to achieve transformational change as part of our EDI strategy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nadia. Very interesting. Tyson.
Thank you, Ian, and hi Nadia. First of all, congratulations on the People Survey uplift in terms of reasonable adjustment. I think that's a great achievement. On the race report, I'll return to my familiar theme of recruitment, because we do need to do something about the disproportionality in terms of ethnic minority appointments. I'm really encouraged by the fact that you're saying that we're going to try and remedy this and going to use the recruitment into ops in order to do that. And you can do that by looking at certain parts of the country. You can focus on certain media or places where people look in order to see jobs that have been advertised. But are we confident that our processes are fit for purpose when it comes to this, or do we really need to give them a good look at in order to make sure that we're screening out any discrimination that we possibly can?
We are using the external recruitment review to robustly assess how we can improve our process, but we have started to make some changes in our job adverts so we can actively encourage colleagues from an ethnic minority background as well as disabled colleagues as an interim measure until we put those changes into process for the longer term.
Joyce.
Thank you, Nadia. I think I may have seen 10 years of RES and DES, that's the acronyms for the survey that's done, and I have never seen any significant movement in the survey results. So that we've just talked about an anti-racism policy. The figures here show that we are below in terms of diversity recruitment and significant below senior leaders who have come from a diverse backgrounds. And it's not just about getting numbers in, it's about how do they influence, and we're significantly below there. We also have more discrimination for people from a diverse background, and the same can be seen for disability as well, as in significantly below in terms of recruitment and also in senior positions, and more discrimination in terms of bullying, harassment. These figures haven't moved significantly. So I know we're doing an awful lot to try and change them, but I'm not confident that our procedures, our policies and procedures actually are anti-racist and support disability rights. And I think that unless we are confident and we do that proper cross-check, then, and I'm saying this, I'm not saying that this is our organisation, but you can't say we're not institutionally racist, and you cannot say that we have an institutional bias towards people with a disability, because our figures tell us that we have a problem. I think we need to be a bit more forensic in our approach and start targeting key areas, particularly around recruitment. You've laid out an awful lot of good things that we're doing, but until we get the basics right, they will not matter because the people aren't in the organisation to experience those good things. So we've got to get the basic right, and I would advocate for a more forensic approach. Because I don't want to be here for another 10 years. I may not be here for another 10 years. But these figures haven't shifted in terms of the dial at all. So we need to actually have a bit more action around these.
Thanks, Joyce. I mean, the purpose of today is, say, primarily just to approve the documents. So, but I think it is right to be clear that there's an action to look at this more forensically. And if it hasn't changed over many years, why not? And what do we have to do to shift the dial? Chris.
just remembered I need to switch on my mic. And obviously, Nadia, thank you so much, for the work, and it's helpful to see, and obviously in support in terms of, where you're trying to get us to. But just to add on Joyce's point about, things seem not to be changing over a period of time, and we are not alone in this area. But there's something about, we might be really busy and active and doing so many actions and having so many action plans, but the judgment's around the impact of what we are doing. So we might end up doing a lot of things, but the impact is very, very minimum. So we might have to think about actually what are the key, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 things we really need to focus on and target on in order for us to get the most impact on what we are trying to do. That's one. The second bit I just wanted to highlight as well, I suppose the challenge is, if you look at certain level, I suppose grade A's within the organizations, and you look at majority of them are sort of colleagues are from white background. So when you think about actually how do we improve, for example, our exec roles, for example, because normally we get people with experience of regulation within those areas. So it's always going to be a challenge to get people at exec level, because the people we are sort of recruiting from are all from sort of a white background. So there's some work we need really to be targeted to think about how do we increase a certain level of colleagues who work in the organization from a diverse background. But thank you for the paper, really helpful.
Okay, Charmy, a last comment if we could.
Yeah, thanks for the paper. Joyce, to pick up your point, because I think I sort of had a similar view again when I read this, and I wondered in terms of the forensic approach and linking it back to phase 2 of the past paper we looked at, whether we should be doing that. So I looked at what was indicator 3, for example, which looks at the relative likelihood of ethnic minority colleagues entering a formal disciplinary process. And you look at the recruitment one, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be using our audits, again, forensically, and I'm only a sample of one round the table talking about audits because I chair the committee, but why wouldn't we put our stall out there and say next year on our audit plan we want to look at that, to go through, look at those, get someone to look independently at all of those processes and ensure that the process was equal, that the process followed to put those people into those disciplinary processes were followed in the same kind of way, that the recruitment was done. So I think, as part of putting our stall out there and doing some of that more forensic analysis, I think we should commit to things like our audit plan really containing visible signs that we are going to do it differently.
Could we modify the action we talked about earlier just to do just that? I mean, I'm very struck reading this, that we are doing an awful lot, and we spend a lot of time talking here, and it's so there's a lot of time being spent, and there's probably quite a lot of money. So it's doubly disappointing that we're not shifting the dial. If we're doing nothing, not shifting the dial, that's bad another way. But what we're doing is clearly not having the impact that we wanted. So perhaps if I could ask if so we're here to approve the reports, but it's what they tell us, I guess, that's important. So can we take away, see, there may be other actions that are included in your suggestion of forensic look, but maybe that would be a particular starting point. Claire, were you trying to put your hand up? No, I really will make this last comment. Okay, we're being asked to approve this as a document, subject to the caveat that I will drop you a line to double check a figure. I mean, there's some in there that we'd like to be different, but that's quite different. This is just factual. Are we happy to approve these documents? And these will then become public, yeah? Yeah, okay. Well, thanks very much indeed, Nadia. We approved the reports. That was the easy bit of the way. The more important bit is what they tell us. So we've captured a couple of actions there. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. I think we are now due a short comfort break. So if you could try to keep it to 10 minutes. It's 4:05 by my watch. That won't be the time for those watching this on repeat. But if we could come back at 4:15 our time, that'd be great. Thank you. Action programme. If we could keep this to no more than 10 minutes. We're running a little bit late, but thank you for putting it on the agenda. And Carolyn and Nicola, thank you very much for joining us. But Chris.
I'll let my colleagues talk in a second, just to say this is an important piece of work for us, which has its origins back almost in the days of lockdown. Maternity services were stubbornly poor in the sense that they didn't improve for a period of time, and we knew that we needed to do something different from what we had previously done. Thanks to my colleagues here today, but also colleagues that are hopefully looking at this today. We've managed to produce what I think is a fantastic report, not just that is honest and truthful, as Chris was saying earlier, about what we found out there, but also helps guide people around how to make things better and how to improve services. So I'll hand over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Chris. Taking the report as read, I think that the first things I wanted to draw attention to is we launched the two products last week, but firstly around the end of programme report and also the improvement toolkit. And through our engagement throughout this programme with frontline staff and with families, we felt it was really important to have those two strong elements. I think it's been very well received out in the sector, but also it received significant attention last week in the media, and I think that was right. It's called, this is calling out some really hard truths, and I think that did land well out there. But also the point around the improvement toolkit. What we can't do is solely focus on a rhetoric of problems, but because we also did find good care, and that was really important that we acknowledged that as part of the improvement toolkit. So I was really pleased that they were received well. We are now focusing on the sort of the where next with this, and that's very much around the follow-up work. We're also very focused around baby deaths as well. So we're doing some work at the moment to explore two tracks. So firstly, there is an option around do we look at a change in regulations, but we're also looking at actually what other data sets are currently available. So we're working closely with D&I colleagues around a first attempt at that data set, which we should have pretty imminently actually, and there are other national solutions which we are feeding into. Carolyn, do you want to say any more?
Yeah, I think this programme of work was a really good example of how you can bring a team of inspectors together. You give them a core purpose, you fire up that passion in them, you give them additional training on that subject, and you just get out and you get on and you deliver. And we've got, a team of, as some of you will know because they've contacted you, really passionate people, and now they are really want to keep on to drive, that improvement forward. So I think it is a great example of what we can do and we do well, and we're all proud of what we've done in this space as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much. I had a couple of comments, but other colleagues may. Any questions or comments for you, Stephen?
Firstly, huge congratulations. I think you and your team have done the most fantastic job, and I think it's a great example of how CQC can add real value in improving the quality of care across a major part of the system. So I think you've done a fantastic job, and your team have just been brilliant. Two questions then about kind of the follow-up. One is, I think the improvement toolkit is really important and valuable innovation. I think it is an innovation in how CQC has gone about doing the reporting. I think it's a good innovation. How would you also want us to build it into the future inspection programme? Because particularly for RI and inadequate, we need to sort of keep going back, helping colleagues in those services and units to use the toolkit to good effect to get improvement. So how do we build this into the ongoing programme? Secondly, some of the reporting has come back from providers saying, this is all sensible, it's all good stuff, but we're actually getting a bit overwhelmed in terms of recommendation for what we should be doing differently and better. How do we help colleagues make sense of a variety of different reports on where we should be doing better, so that they know what they need to prioritise, because it will really make the greatest difference?
Thank you, Stephen. So absolutely, and that was very, just if I start off with the second point first of all, the point about recommendations, we heard loud and clear throughout that programme, and that's why within the recommendations in this report, actually predominantly they were aimed at they were aimed at the system partners, ICBs, Royal Colleges, other stakeholders within that system that will have a huge influence. So less for frontline staff to, things that will support frontline staff, but not necessarily that's going to take them away, because we recognise there is a plethora of recommendations out there. And I think that really speaks to, again, to the improvement toolkit. And the improvement toolkit very much aims at, there are examples of good care and good practice for frontline staff, but also for managers, for trust leaders, for ICBs, and that was very deliberate, because that's what people told us when we met with them earlier in March this year, that actually that is what's needed. They need good examples, and that absolutely has to be, to your first point, be followed up as part of the follow-up inspection activity. And actually it was really nice, I think it was yesterday I received an email from a colleague in CQC to say, actually it was really good, because they were liaising with the trust to say, yes, we've got examples of good care, and here's the place where you can go and look at it. And to me, that has to be a live document. As we progress through our follow-up activity, we have to keep that live, and we have to keep it current, and because it's so important to demonstrate what good can look like. Anything you want to add?
I think just the point about can we do it for more services in the future, I think that this is the beauty of the maternity work, was because we focused on a topic, if you like, and it gave us that real helicopter view of just one area, so it was easier to do it. But there are opportunities for us to do improvement resources and signpost it, and most definitely. But there are lots of ways of inspecting, aren't there? We can inspect where we all go and inspect different services, or we can take more of a thematic approach. And there are pros and cons for both ways of inspecting.
I have to say, probably those are my questions, so I will have nothing further to add or comment and question. One more, Chris.
Thanks, Ian. I just wanted to say thank you to you too. I mean, there's a team behind you for this report, but I just wanted to acknowledge your leadership, Nicola and Caroline, for your leadership for this report, and thank you so much for persisting and pushing, and we are here now, and this will make a big difference to people who access maternity services, so a massive thank you to you too.
Okay. If we haven't spent a long time today, it's because we're very busy rather than anything else. But just to echo, I mean, everyone's great piece of work. I love the way that we're trying to use it to help people improve and then bake it into what we do. Many systems, and this health is no different. Maybe it's worse than some others, are full of reports which recommended things and nothing ever happens. So, we can't drive change across the whole system, but I think we do what we would do. I'll just leave you with a thought, and I'm not suggesting a whole separate report back to the board, but it would be interesting to reflect in 12 months' time whether we think there's been any positive outcomes from this. And as an organisation, I think one of the challenges for us, we've seen this in the penny dash reports, is more focused on outcomes as opposed to activity or inputs. So I think finding a way of saying in 12 months' time what evidence is there that this has had a positive impact. Hopefully it will have. I know there are so many things that are going on, we can't measure our impact in isolation, but nevertheless, I'll leave the thought. And if it has, well, lessons learned, how can that be used in the future? So I'll leave that thought with you, but thank you very much indeed to both of you for what you've done. Really helpful. The most important benefit is to the potential mothers, obviously, but also being helpful to CQC. So thank you very much for that. Okay, thanks. If we move swiftly on, it's another piece of work we just want to note at the board. James, it's the dementia strategy, and I think Mary Cridge is going to join us, hopefully.
Yep, we should be being joined by Mary Cridge. Just to give an outline, this, just to set the context, it's really important that as we focus on recovery, that we, as it were, take stock of some of the regulatory leadership work that's been underway and to acknowledge it with external partners that we've been working with and communicate, as it were, a position to the external world. But Mary Cridge.
Hello, Mary. Sorry for starting without you, but we're pushed for time, so it's us, not you.
Let's go. Yeah, on the mic.
So, Mary, I mean, we've read the papers. There's no need to talk us through them, but any particular observations you wish to make be helpful.
Yes, so the message I wanted to get across was the balance of the importance of this work in its own right and the relationship to our focus on recovery. Dementia is a national priority in terms of the numbers of people affected. It's a truly cross-sector challenge. It puts great pressure on health and care services. Alzheimer's Society research has estimated the annual economic cost to the UK as 42 billion, rising to 90 billion by 2040. And the huge cost to the service comes in unplanned acute hospital stays. Very little of that sum is on actual diagnosis and treatment. We supplied a short video, which if you haven't had the chance to look at, I commend to you. It gives insight into the human cost that families are living with. The papers have set out how this work links to our strategy and to our recovery priorities. The prize that we're playing for is a co-produced, evidence-based, widely agreed definition of what good dementia care looks like, leading to statutory guidance against which we would register, regulate and enforce, and we would pull all our regulatory levers, and this guidance would also influence commissioning behaviour and future developments. We've taken this work so far. We're now pausing, and before we put it in the drawer to get it out later, we'd welcome your endorsement of the work so far and your support to carry on with it when it is sensible to do so.
Okay, thanks very much, Mary. Questions or comments? Christine?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think this is a very good piece of work. I've obviously been privileged to be involved in a discussion at the beginning and just more recently about it. I do see it very much as a starting point, not an end point. And in terms of where we are with recovery, it is important. As you say, dementia is a massive issue, both on a personal and an economic level. But I think one of the most important ways in which it helps us with recovery is because it has been, I would say, collaborated so far with a number of other organisations and providers, and it's helping us with that building trust and credibility. So that is important, and I'm really glad we've done that. I mean, I'd be very interested to know more about how health is collaborating and how much good practice we've been able to identify there. Because I think I said to you in our first conversation about this, and Stephen and I had a bit of an exchange about this, to me, it's not that I don't think that there is poor dementia practice within social care, because I know there is, but I also know that dementia is very much the bread and butter of a lot of adult social care, and therefore I think it is more evolved. Whereas my personal and professional experience in relation to primary and secondary health has been that it isn't great, that actually it's very hard to see often that people's dignity is being protected, that there is an understanding of how dementia affects their ability to access and receive good care in health settings. So That's one of the sort of things I think is important. I also, again, have highlighted the issue around innovation. I don't think innovation and observing and assessing innovation is a CQC strength in general as yet. I hope it will be in the future. And I think that relates to dementia too. And as I said, to me, there's a real tension between being too prescriptive and trying to link everything to an evidence base, when innovation isn't about evidence. Innovation is about creativity and trying new things. So you won't always have the evidence base there. There's a tension there, and you can see it in the strategy on a page. And I know you're aware of it, but I just want to sort of put on record that that's something that we haven't yet resolved within CQC. It's something that was alluded to by, well, mentioned by, I think by Penny Dash. And it's very important that we could use this dementia strategy as a way to develop and evolve how we approach innovation. So, you know, congratulations, it's great. Lots more work to do when the time is right, and it will improve how we can help improve practice generally.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Any other comments? Stephen.
Mary, thank you. It's a really useful report. I'm not clear what it's recommending to us about the next step and when, because you say in the report that we need to develop a better understanding of what good looks like. I'm assuming kind of sequentially we've got to do that piece of work before we can start training our colleagues in how to mainstream this in our inspection and assessment process. So that piece of work on articulating what good looks like kind of has to come first, but I think you said we're kind of putting it in the drawer, was your language. So
yeah.
Can we go ahead with that or not yet, or what is it you're actually proposing?
Well, we wanted to update you on what we've done since the last time that that this came to you. We have already made great advances in the work about what good looks like. We've been welcomed with open arms by various universities, key stakeholders, the Alzheimer's Society, Dementia UK. We've got a really strong base. Our own assessment of Give Feedback on Care has pointed us towards access and pathways as areas to focus. Information from carers, very negative experiences in both a GP practice and receiving a care in an acute setting. So we're being very careful not to duplicate what others are already doing well. I think this is us using our marshalling and convening powers to agree collectively. So it wouldn't take much more to get those firm definitions and turn that into statutory guidance. But this isn't the moment for that. We want to divert our attention to supporting recovery. When inspections do pick up, the prevalence of dementia means that our inspectors will be encountering that. Penny Dash has referenced dementia knowledge in her report. So the reinvigoration of short observational framework training is absolutely key, because that tool is so important in the observation and reporting of people's experience. So, and we want, when we are ready to do it, to make CQC a genuinely dementia-friendly organisation, so that all our staff, in whatever role they have, are familiar with it as a concept, and most people have encountered it in their personal lives as well as at work. So we're going to watch, and we're putting it down for a little while. We'll look early next year and see where things are going. And when we do, the numbers of inspections increases, that will include dementia services in that work.
Thanks, Mary. I mean, as you say, it is, well, both of you said, it's becoming ever more prevalent. So you know, we talked earlier about making sure we were adapting as an organisation as things change, and this is a classic example where it's going to become more prevalent in many of the settings, and there's a focus on it, so we have to adapt. So if this can help us do our core job, by which I mean assessments and inspections, with due respect to everything else, then that's got to be good for us and the quality of what we provide. So thank you very much indeed. If there are no other questions, we'll leave it to it, Mary, but thank you very much indeed
Thank
for
you very
coming
much.
along. There's one last main thing on the agenda to deal with, requires approval, which is our policy on freedom to speak up. So, Chris, I think it's over to you. Is Carolyn going to come back in?
I think whilst Caroline is coming, just to say, I'm encouraged to see, where the state in terms of the policy in place, just helping us to think about freedom to speak up. We now have a clear clarity in terms of what is speaking up, whistleblowing, conflict resolution, health and safety measures, and this, policy gives us the opportunity to have a clear step-by-step guide,
So, Carolyn, apologies. We started without you, we're trying to. I know one or two people have trains to get, so I want to make sure we aren't late. But I know a huge amount of work's gone into this. I've seen that from. I have made no real contribution to it, so I claim no credit. But I know a lot of other people have a huge amount of work into it. So we've read the paper. Did go through the detail, but it'd be interesting to get your observation and points we should be aware of. Thanks.
Yeah, so thank you, and I'm sure you're all aware that this has been obviously to ARAC already, and you will see that some purple text within the policy, and that's because there's have been some changes since it went to the Audit and Risk Committee. So, I mean, there's been consultation done with this policy with the trade unions. We do need to finish off a bit more work with the equality impact assessment to go alongside this, but the policy is based on best practice that comes from NHS England and the National Guardian's office. So we need to keep hold of that as well as make it fit to what we want as an organisation. But hopefully we've strengthened the process a bit more, and we want to do more around the follow-up of freedom to speak up. It's not just a case, because people do speak up in our organisation. People do tell us, but it's about how we respond and what we do about that and how well they feel listened to. So hopefully the new policy will help us emphasise that more. And we're doing a lot more reporting on it now. Still got a lot more to do, really recognise that, but we are getting somewhere, we're making progress, and it feels different to what it felt previously, and that's really important. So.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. I mean, I know this is one of those areas where we've had a number of NEDs, directly involved. Apologies if I missed anyone, but I know Mark Chambers, Charmian and Stephen, for no particular order there, have all been heavily involved in discussions, given different roles. It is for approval. Any observations or questions from colleagues? Stephen.
Sorry to come in again. Firstly, big welcome for this. Thank you, Carolyn, for putting so much effort with colleagues into the development of this new policy. I think it's responded very well to what we asked, for something that's clearer about what is the process, what is the follow-up, and how do we signal people to the right pathways for the particular concern that they're raising. So I think that's all a big move forward. Now that we've got this, there needs to be an extensive, at-scale messaging to colleagues across the organisation, because I don't think colleagues are necessarily all aware of Speak Up, certainly not in this new form. I'm not sure that colleagues necessarily have full confidence in Speak Up, that it will lead to anything. So there's now that we've got a better policy, we need to convince people that we've got a better policy, that they can use it with confidence, knowing what's going to happen and what the follow-up will be. So it's that next piece that I'm interested in, kind of where do we go with this to build awareness and confidence across the organisation?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you've said. October is National Freedom to Speak Up Month, so it's it's really timely that we can do a lot more publicity around that with staff and talking about it. We've got more guardians. Since April this year, we've had 2 additional guardians. They're getting out and talking to people a lot more. So we have got more of a communications plan around what we're doing.
Christine.
Thanks. Really a sort of a question. There's 2 things we say in here that we talk about making sure people will be safe and assuring them that they will be safe if they speak up. And a few pages further on, we tell colleagues that issues they raise will be addressed. But actually, as a board, both individually and collectively, we know that people haven't always felt safe most recently, and that issues they've raised haven't been addressed. So I just wanted to know, how are we going to change that for the future?
It's a good question, and I'm not going to pretend that we're going to solve everything immediately, because that would be naive. I think we aiming to have a culture where everybody feels that their opinion is valid and that they are heard. I think it's really important that we do a lot more work around going back to people that have come forward to see how they're feeling, whether if they feel that they've suffered any detriment from speaking up. We need to invest a lot more in the back end of freedom to speak up, not just listening. It's not just about me listening to people, it's about what the actions, and we need the whole organisation to commit to that.
So, Charmin.
Can I just come in on that one? I think, well done. I think it's fantastic work, and I've really enjoyed working with you and the team on it, because obviously there's a lot of passion in order to get it right. So I think obviously colleagues have raised the importance of comms and getting the policy out there, getting it really visible, and there's lots of things we can do with that. In terms of the structure, if Jackie Jackson was here, we have had conversations around how to put some of that structure around, how to ensure we have communication templates ready to support that. That will obviously be tailored to situations, but also to have logs in terms of concerns raised, so that we follow through, we ensure that the concerns are followed up and closed out effectively. We are getting some great reporting, which has come in now from Carolyn to Eric, that looks at, on an anonymous basis, the types of concerns that have been raised, how it's been closed out, whether protected characteristics were involved, in order to us to really look at those themes. And then obviously, in addition to the quarterly ARAC reporting, which we spend time on, it will come to the board once a year. So hopefully some of the structure that HR will put around it over coming months, combined with the communication, and then having greater escalation through governance, so we get visibility of the issues and ensuring they are followed out, will provide some of that. That's the goal.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that we make sure that we analyse what action we have taken in a very systematic way that Charmian is outlining. I think the other thing for us as an executive is about leadership. I think the tone that Kate Taroney has set around this issue and the profile that she's given it has been really important as part of the change, and empowering, as it were, Carolyn and others to really make this effective. And I think
people
part
came
of Chris's leadership will be
sorry,
about that.
James, to cut you, but people did come forward after Kate had said those things about having a great day at work and encouraging people. We noticed a significant increase, and people told us they came forward because of what Kate had said to them.
Okay, we're being asked to have a couple of observations, but being asked to approve it. Are we happy to approve it? Yeah, okay, approved. Echoing your thanks to you and indeed my colleagues around the table for their effort. It is a mega step forward on where we were. I'm not sure I give it quartiles, but it's pretty good now, and it wasn't before. I just particularly commend two things. One is the flow chart. I really love that. I think actually, Mark, you may be responsible for that, aren't you, as a model from elsewhere? So, but I think there's benefits in using that sort of approach for other policies, because where they're complicated, it can be very difficult. People, I mean, most people don't use most policies most of the time, and you have a limited attention span. So making life easy to use the right one, I think, is helpful. So I'd like to see that used as a model. And then the other thing is not the policy itself, but the cover sheet. This is a new idea, and I think actually Charmian did the donkey work on this, but I think it's really helpful, and I'd like to just be clear, looking at executive colleagues, this is now required. No policy comes to the board in future without one of these. And Sasha, if you could enforce that, please. The only other point I would make is you've got a proposed review date of September 2026, 2 years away. Every 2 years or so would normally sound okay. I'm not saying change it particularly, but I don't think we should be wedded to that. This is new. I think we should keep on to review how we think it's working and not be afraid to change it before then. We don't need to wait to September 26 if we think we should. Joyce, sorry.
Sorry, just really quickly, and thank you for the policy. If we're going to have this cover sheet, can we have an addition that the equality impact assessment has been completed?
All right, Caroline, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right, a couple of last matters. We circulated the board papers a while ago. I think there was a request for a change from somebody, which Ibrahim has done. Are we happy to approve the minutes as amended? Okay, great. The action log, there's not a huge amount there. Ofsted Learning, given how busy we've been today, we've deferred that till November. But in any event, I won't say it's been overtaken by events, but of course we've had a new development of Ofsted saying they're proposed to change the way they do things. And then it says here that RGC committee should review response to commitments identified, blah, 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 and for consideration at the November board meeting. It won't be after that. I did wonder actually whether it should be at the RGC, but we can sort that out later, but it will get done. I had no other business. We have some public questions we'll take after the meeting is over, briefly. But any other business from anybody looking around the table? Okay, well, look, thank you, colleagues. It's been a very long day for everyone, so I appreciate the fact we still got energy in the room at 4:30. That's fantastic. I'll close the meeting on that basis, but as usual, we agreed to take questions. We have three. I'm going to take the first and then over to Tyson and James for second and third. So the first question says, when will CQC invite members of the public to attend its board meetings in person, as was the case in the past, and NHS England board meetings? I mean, the short answer, I have to say, is we're not currently planning to change the current arrangements. The changes were made, as I understand it, around about the time of COVID. I think what we do now, by normally making live stream, although I appreciate it's not a live stream today, but there is a recording, but doing that makes it accessible to many more people, many hundreds of people listening to this, and we get feedback in different ways. The problem with public meetings is it would require us, we haven't got the facilities in the office, we moved to location since pre-COVID, it would be quite expensive to, as well as disruptive, to hire facilities elsewhere. And for the limited number of people we ever used to get, and the fact that we're not really being requested to today, it didn't seem that on the basis of value for money we could justify the public expense of doing so. But these things are all kept under review, so that's no such thing as never. But subject to the glitch today, I think the live streaming has proved really very successful in engaging with people, far more so than asking people to trog out to East London to attend a meeting. The second question, many members of the public expressed concerns to CQC by telephone calls to Newcastle. Why do so few of these calls receive a response from CQC? Tyson.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you for the question. All concerns raised with CQC via telephone are either resolved on the call or shared with inspection colleagues for further review or action. For priority 1 and 2 calls, someone should be contacted to explain what action we are planning to take or to get some further information. We do not currently operate a follow-up response to members of the public for lower priority calls. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Tyson. And last, James, one for you. How does CQC plan to inspect and rate the performance of integrated care boards?
Thank you, Ian, and thanks for the question. So it's the Health and Care Act 2022, which gives us the new powers to conduct reviews and to assess integrated care systems. And within that, we will include an assessment of the integrated care board with the other relevant parts of the integrated care system as a whole. Our assessments have to align with the Secretary of State's objectives and priorities. There has, of course, been a change in the Secretary of State since we began the development of this work, and that's under the legislation as well. We're continuing to work on our approach to this, and we're engaging with government to obtain approval to our approach to this duty. But in addition, we need to consider the findings, the final findings of the Dr. Penny Dash review. In the interim findings, there is a recommendation that we pause this work, and so due to this, our integrated care systems assessments currently remain paused. Point of clarity in the question and the answer. So the assessment of ICBs, which is the question, is undertaken by NHS England, and they are working on a new approach to assessment of ICB oversight, and that was consulted on earlier in this year. And CQC will continue to work with NHS England to ensure our two approaches complement one another.
But meantime, we await further discussions with the government. Okay, thank you very much indeed, James. I think that answers all of the questions. So thank you for those that tabled them, Tim. Our next meetings will be on the 27th of November of this year, so we look forward to welcoming people then. Thank you.